Hello my friends, Takuya here, and welcome back to another What If Hearts of Iron 4 video. Today's question, what if the Swiss actually did something in World War II? I have to say, the support that I've been getting for the series already of what ifs has been fantastic. Thank you all, each and every one of you. If you like what it is that I've been doing with combining alternate history and what if scenarios with these games, I want to do more stuff with EU4, Victoria 3, and other things as it comes along. Everything that you do for interacting with these videos helps, and if you want to have your suggestion go and be one of the future videos, let me know in the comment section below what it is that we should do next for our alternate what if in history. I'm going to take the top 5 most liked ones off of this video, and I'm going to post it in a community poll so we can see what people want to see next. Anyway, Switzerland. Switzerland, I have to say, is easily one of my favorite nations in Hearts of Iron 4. Really, I love minor nations in this so much more than major nations. I really do, because the amount of interesting alternate history that you can create with them and just their own little fascinating details is so much fun. Canada, Mexico, Switzerland, these are incredible amounts of fun to play. And Switzerland easily has one of the most interesting histories of World War II. As I'm sure many of you are already aware, Switzerland was neutral back during World War II. They didn't join either the Allies or the Axis. Instead, they maintained a policy of armed neutrality, something in which they would stand off against both entities, both powers, and not let either into their borders. Through maintaining this strict armed neutrality in arming their population as a kind of deterrent against Axis forces, they made it so that the Axis saw that invading them was going to cost more than it would actually get out of it by taking them over in the first place. On the reverse, though, they would not really assist the Allies. One of the things that ended up happening in World War II is that as bombing missions were starting to be run into Germany, if bombers or, American or British aircraft started to go over what was Swiss territory, Swiss fighter planes would chase them down and try to take them out. Anything that incurred upon the borders of Switzerland, they would fight tooth and nail, no matter who it was. So the question for the scenario then becomes, well, what if Switzerland actually did something? I'm inspired by the words of Zamp Brannigan. What makes a man neutral? The answer is being surrounded by potential enemies. Reality for Switzerland going into the year 1936 is that everything is at a crossroads. Obviously, the Germans have managed to cement their powers here to the north, you have the fascist Italians to the south, and really, war is looking like it's going to become inevitable at this point. The Swiss, over the course of the 1930s, were actually one of the most prolific armors? What would be the term here in the scenario? Armamenters. Armorers. Basically what I'm trying to get at here is that over the course of the 1930s, even prior to the other major powers trying to prepare themselves for the rise of Germany, Switzerland had already been doing this. Before determining what is going to happen, that means that we're going to need to start here with Swiss guiding principles, because Switzerland, it is here in the mid-1930s that we would need to determine a course of action for what would happen or what would need to happen in the event that Switzerland actually does go and join World War II. Over the course of this time period, all the way going in through the 1930s, the big thing that they're going to have to focus on is largely infrastructure and as well as their civilian developments. Switzerland at this time is still in the middle of a bit of an economic depression or recession. It's not doing great economically. And, of course, because of its isolated nature, Switzerland is dependent on quite literally all of its neighbors in order to actually get trade. In fact, one of the crucial details that we're going to need to mention here is that the overwhelming majority of Swiss trade is specifically with Germany. That was true prior to World War II, and that was true during World War II. Almost all of the Swiss economy was dependent upon German trade. Therefore, even in a scenario in which Switzerland actually does something with World War II, they're still going to need to maintain their relations with the powers around them in order to make sure that they don't get immediately screwed. To that end, let's see, infantry equipment, support equipment, we're going to need all that, and also trucks, some civilian trains. Now, we're going to need some guns. We're going to need some guns, put all these guys into an army, and then just start training them up. Once we have done that, we can begin. Now, I know that the question that people are immediately going to have in the beginning here is, what exactly is Switzerland going to do? Doing something in World War II can have a very broad definition. And so there's this idea of, well, what if Switzerland had joined in at the beginning of the war? What if they had joined in at the end of the war? What if they had joined in at literally any point? What if they had helped the Axis? What if they had helped the Allies? What if they had done something else and helped the Comintern? There's many different ideas that one could have in this scenario. Historically, what had been done is that we must protect our democratic and neutral values, where, specifically, they moved towards arming themselves while maintaining their independence from any powers whatsoever. In this case, though, we're going to have Switzerland take a more active stance, something about protecting their democracy. Immediately after that, we have two options: increased defense budget or National Defense Fund. I'm going to go with the National Defense Fund because this is going to give me 3 civilian factories and also minus 15% consumer goods. That is great. Switzerland during this time period was going to start a number of different funds specifically to focus on rearmament and defense of the country. Defensive structures, pillboxes, making sure that all their troops were modernized in every kind of equipment that they could possibly get. This was a crucial detail for the defense of Switzerland. On that note, while we're here and we have the political power, we're going to go ahead and drop down to early mobilization, just because this is going to help us with our defenses. And it makes sense that historically they would have started a early mobilization process in preparation of the coming storm. Elections for the President of the Swiss Confederation. This is an interesting point of how all this works within Swiss democracy, for anyone who is confused. Every year, the Swiss Federal Assembly chooses one of the councillors to be president of the Swiss Confederation. First among equals, he will use his limited powers to represent the council and break any ties in the council to gently steer the council towards safety or glory. Once a councillor becomes president of the Confederation, they will not be able to be assigned as a political advisor again, but they will have a powerful decision at their disposal. When a political advisor slot is vacant for too long, you will suffer penalties. In this case, it's not going to matter who we choose since all of them are the same guy, so Albert Meyer, you can become president. We'll have that being done, and that is going to free us a slot here in order to get a political advisor. The big thing that Switzerland wanted to focus on was that it was up to date with every single thing. Thus, Adolf Fuhrer, the weapons designer, giving us a research bonus as also a little bit of support for unaligned. This is what we're going to want, as this will also allow us to be able to get an additional research slot later. Nazi Party representative in Switzerland assassinated. Yes, okay, this is where it becomes very interesting. Over the course of World War II, naturally I'm sure many people are aware that the Nazis were trying to specifically influence many of the states around them, supporting nationalist parties and other things. Switzerland, this was a very common thing in because Switzerland has a very large Germanic population. Not everyone appreciates this, however, and so the people who are supported by the Nazis had a tendency to run into some serious trouble. In this case, one of the guys getting assassinated. Of course, we're not going to support Germany from this and give him a harsh punishment. Instead, we're going to give this guy a fair trial. The reason being is that if Switzerland was focused a little bit more on being able to defend themselves against the Germans, there's a very real possibility that they would want to work with such an individual rather than just throwing them away. After National Defense Fund, we can increase the defense budget, which gives us 2 military slots, but in this case, what we are going to do instead is reaffirm spiritual defense. We are going to move past this immediately. The reason being is because this is going to give us some more political power, and it will help us with further developments as we go. Our Confederation has been committed to the defense of Swiss national values since 1932 in response to the growing threat of authoritarianism around it. Now more than ever, the menace looms large, so we must renew our pledge to defend the way of life physically and spiritually. This is one of the key ways in which the Swiss were actually able to keep themselves independent, because the population itself did not support the Germans, like what happened in the case of Austria, where a large percentage of them did support Germany. Maintaining that ideological purity, to that sense, is vastly more important in Switzerland than it is in other places, as is making sure that the militia is fully prepared. It's at this point, though, that Switzerland is faced with a very interesting dilemma in history. They have to maintain their neutrality, so to speak, while still, at this point, looking for an outlet of where is it that they are going to join in. Spoiler alert, but if the Swiss were to join anyone in World War II, the answer is more than likely the Allies. Switzerland was extremely proud of its democracy, meaning they would absolutely do anything that they could in the event that they abandoned their neutrality to support the Allies. The problem becomes is that even if they want to support the Allies, they still have to maintain a degree of relation with Axis powers, considering that they are, well, quite literally going to be surrounded by them. This is the fine line that Switzerland had to tread in our timeline, and so the question becomes, when is it that they are going to cross that line? Well, let's find out. First things first, fortifying the border with Germany. Of course, the German Reich poses an existential threat to the survival of the Swiss Confederation. If war broke out between the German Reich and France, the Germans might pass through Switzerland instead of the heavily fortified border with France, or through the Netherlands and Belgium. We can build fortifications between our countries to deter the German Reich. With the outbreak of the Spanish Civil War, things in Europe would obviously become significantly more tense, but the Swiss during this time are entirely focused on their own internal developments. That is really all it is that they can do. After fortifying the border with Germany, which would obviously upset many of the powers around them, Switzerland would continue to try to maintain its neutrality over the course of the entirety of this duration. They can't just immediately side with one power. It wouldn't make sense. They cannot risk sacrificing all of their trade with the Germans. However, even as they struggle to build friendly relations, they will simultaneously begin to ban foreign Nazi propaganda. This was an issue. There was many different newspapers and entities that existed throughout Switzerland that shared a variety of different views. with several of them fascist programs being sponsored specifically by the Nazis. In this sense, they will be removed from the country. Of course, this is bound to upset the Germans, which means that all diplomatic efforts would be made to specifically try to keep them happy, increase trade, do anything that they can in order to please them, but keep them at arm's length. With the banning of Nazi propaganda, that means that the next course of action is to begin immediately boosting up trade. In order to finance Switzerland's rearmament, they had to do everything they possibly could in order to funnel money into the military. Trading gold with the Allies would be a key step in this to both cement relations and simultaneously boost finances. And with gold being done, the next step that we're going to have is to try and strengthen our own defenses. Bro-ha! We cannot let our neighbors know that we are trying to gather intelligence on them, so we must rely on semi-independent intelligence agencies to take on covert operations. That's where photography business turned spy master Hans Hosseman comes in with his small and nimble intelligence office. He can do the work that needs to be done without getting our hands dirty. Yes, Switzerland is going to need to do everything it can to maintain its own intelligence about what is happening around it in order to secure its independence. Now with the trial of David Frankfurter, well, we're going to let the court make their decision, and even then, historically, there's a very, very low chance that this individual would end up getting freed from prison outright, just because there's no way that the Swiss would want to absolutely piss off the Germans. Therefore, we're going to let the court make their decision, and he is going to get sentenced. That's going to happen. Yes, I should have done this earlier because I completely forgot while actually doing the other things. But yes, Switzerland is going to need to start trading gold with allied states around it, or rather the allies around them, because in this sense, it's going to make them extremely valuable and start building up trade and diplomatic relations. That thing. By maximizing trade through France, it's going to be incredibly useful, as that will increase construction speed each time by like 9%, which is awesome. And that means from Swiss Gold Market, we have a minus 30% to our consumer goods, increased construction speed, increased research speed. This is exactly what we want. With Broha complete, that means we can launch Pro Helvetia. The spiritual defense of Switzerland requires that Swiss culture remains singular, indivisible, and distinct from our neighbors. This new organization, Pro Helvetia, will preserve and promote our shared Swiss values, deeply tied to our democracy, and ensure survival against overwhelming odds, I'm guessing. Against being overwhelmed. Yes, that. At this point, all the way through 1936 and really 1937, Switzerland is going to focus entirely on its own internal defenses, both cultural, political, and simultaneously physical. With that, we have the election for the new president of the Swiss Confederation, and the one that we are going to choose is Adolf Hitler. It is important during this time that we get an additional research slot, and simultaneously, Switzerland is going to focus on its own internal developments to rapidly modernize its military and population. To that end, it is time to expand our arms industry. With Pro Helvetia and our spiritual defense confirmed, it is time at this point to begin focusing on other aspects. After fortifying the border with France, we are going to purchase German planes, and of course, the Swiss are going to begin engaging in more trade and diplomatic talks with the Germans, just in an effort to try and secure their own independence. This is what happened historically, and even in an alternate history scenario, that's what's going to end up happening. With an outdated air force and lacking the industry and technology to produce aircraft in any significant amounts, we're forced to rely on purchasing them from our neighbors. Buying the planes we need from the German Reich will not only provide us with the equipment we need, but it will also help keep ourselves on their good side. Yep, that is the point. In order to be able to defend Switzerland, you don't just need defenses on the ground, they would need it in the sky as well, which means every single aspect of Swiss society must be heavily modernized. After that, banning the Swiss Communist Party, because of course no one wants to deal with them and they are a destabilizing force. After this, we will withdraw from the League of Nations, which historically is actually what happened Switzerland did, but we are doing this a little bit earlier, just for the sake of our scenario and how all of this plays out. They did this in 1938, we're going to do this in 1937, but we're going to say that in order for them to be more active, they're going to be doing things a little bit, oh goddamn, faster and earlier. That's what's going to happen. At the same time, in order to make sure that they are not going to be completely dependent on foreign outside powers, it is important that synthetic oil experiments begin at this time. Knowing that the Swiss are not going to be able to maintain relations with each and every single entity means that self-sufficiency is going to be crucial during this time. In fact, over the course of World War II, the amount of arable land in Switzerland tripled, or rather not the arable land, but the amount of land that was cultivated did, specifically in order to try and reduce the amount of dependence that they had on foreign powers. And so it is then that after withdrawing from the League of Nations, that Switzerland would launch a trade agreement with Germany. Specifically, it was important during this time in order to bring in as much funds as possible in order to be able to modernize the state and military. This is a crucial detail that is going to be needed. The big thing that people are going to wonder at this point is, okay, so does Switzerland begin trading gold with the Axis now? The answer is still no. Even though, in the game right now, this is going to be the best option that I can. If I really wanted to cheese things and get even more bonuses, I would start trading gold to the Axis. No. Trading gold to the Axis historically did not happen until going into 1940, so after it is that World War II broke out. And the Swiss specifically traded with the Axis in order to be able to, well, not be invaded. That was like kind of the whole point. Germany still needed trade partners. Thus, we are not going to do Axis gold, and instead, we are going to start modernizing the Air Force, a key thing that had to be done at this time to prepare for things in the event of war. Of course, November of 1937 moving into 1938, this is where rearmament, which has already been a priority for the Swiss, becomes paramount, becomes even more important. Thus, military factories are going to start popping up across the country like wildfire. After Swiss airplane design moving into 1938, this is the point at which Switzerland goes and says, hey guys, it's time to be neutral. Yes, I know for anyone who's watching this video, you're probably wondering, why would we go down the armed neutrality path? Is Switzerland not going to join the Allies in World War II? Well, yes, that is the plan, but during this time, it is very important to understand that Switzerland is not prepared for war. The only thing that they could try and do is make themselves as hard of a defensive target as possible, and that is their key tactic, that regardless of what happens in history, this is the more likely scenario, that they still focus on their own internal defense. Of course, the Anschluss of Austria is going to still happen in our timeline, and this is the point that it really does scare the Swiss. They know that they are surrounded on all sides by the Germans. Therefore, arming themselves, as I said, this becomes crucial. After armed neutrality, we're presented with two options, either a frontier defense plan or to promote Henry Guisan. This is historically the guy who was the overall commander of Swiss forces, and this is who we're going to go with. Division defense plus 15. Very nice. Our political system allows for a single general and commander-in-chief only in times of extreme need, when our confederation is at risk. This is certainly one of those situations, and the man for the job is obvious. Henry Guisan is not only the most qualified person for the job, he also enjoys widespread popularity across the Swiss Confederation. Yes, indeed. During this time, Switzerland would focus on increasing its militia, making sure that it is properly defended, and this is largely what it would focus on for the next couple years. Maintaining its forces would become its top priority. That means during this time, there will be no focus on any kind of allied path, there will be no focus on any kind of Axis path, nothing of this is going to happen. No, instead everything is going to focus on internal defenses and consolidation. So, that means improve the defense budget, because more money has to be allocated to the defensive forces and militia, and also after that, a redoubt nationale, focusing on building land forts and also more military factories. And Guisan becomes our commander-in-chief, allowing us to activate relief of command and generate even more army experience. This is going to become crucial during this time. Alright, with Redoubt National completed, that means that we now have even more military factories that we can use to develop our forces, and that's exactly what we are going to do. All those guns that we've been building up the entire time are actually getting utilized. The reason being is that as we expand the militia, it's increasing the size of the forces here that you have on the decision template side. To point that, hey, instead of just 3, we got 7 in here, and that's only going to get bigger. Of course, I can afford significantly more, so we might as well go ahead and construct those. Immediately after that, we focus on improving the templates of them. Spirit of St. Bernard. It's important to understand that Switzerland does not have a very high population. So even with a high percentage of its population being in the military, that's still not many forces. It's important to maintain that great medical tradition we have in order to keep things going. I mean, Spirit of St. Bernard, they nerfed this before, but this thing used to be even more insanely powerful. Plus 20% trickleback rate for force losses and experience loss factor minus 30%. That is awesome. It's at this point, going into the beginning of 1939, though, that things start to become very tense across Europe. And so it's important that Switzerland during this time maintains an active spy force in order to be able to increase its intelligence about what is going on around it. It's had spies in Germany during this time, but it's going to start increasing the strength of its operatives in order to be able to do more. And at the same time, focusing on its aircraft. It's important during this time that Switzerland maintains a very important political balance between its cantons and the federal government, and exactly what it can do. The cantons have more individual control on the lower levels, and this is what allows us to do more in the sense of actually complete more focuses, because in order to do these things, unfortunately within the game, we have to have a certain balance of power that has to be maintained. So, annoying though it is, this is a real kind of issue that Switzerland would have to balance during this time. Because it is going into 1939, as war seems ever closer on the horizon, that Switzerland would prepare to rig the entire country to blow. Literally. Every kind of defense that you could possibly think. Anti-air, land forts, all of it. Every single thing is going to be done in order to try and defend the state. With the fate of Czechoslovakia, that means that the Swiss are going to get even more nervous, as potentially they are the next one up on the chopping block. They do not know what is about to happen. Therefore, it's time to develop some emergency industry. Now that we are bound to destroy our own industrial capacity once the enemy invades our states, we must make sure to have a fallback we can use to build back up what we have left and repel the invaders. Secret tunnels and factories will populate the heart of the mountains and valleys, and some might even be outside of our borders. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, Italy joins the German Reich, and this is the point in which Switzerland truly starts to shit bricks. And with that, Poland refuses the German ultimatum. World War II officially breaks out. So at this point, that many people are going to wonder, alright, so Switzerland is joining in the war, right? No, they're not going to. Even in an alternate history scenario in which Switzerland actually does something, it does not make sense for Switzerland to join in with France at the very beginning of things in World War II. They're not going to. There's simply way too much risk that is involved, and while we could build an alternate history scenario where that does happen, the more likely scenario is that Switzerland still maintains its neutrality over the course of much of World War II, and then at some point decides, hey, we're going to join the Allies. Either in 1943, when the Soviets start to turn things against the Germans, or in 1944, when the Allies go and launch their invasion of Normandy. That is the point that, historically, is most likely for this to happen. Until then, Switzerland focuses on building up not only its own defenses, but preparing offensive capabilities as well, with that in mind. There goes the launch into the Netherlands, and with that, that means that everything in the world is falling to absolute shit. The Swiss are terrified. To that end, even if it is slightly early, it is here that Switzerland is going to offer to start trading with the Germans. Yes, they didn't do this until 1940, but if they're taking a more proactive stance, while things are still a little bit up in the air, there is a chance that Germany is going to leave them alone more. All of the gold that is then being seized by Germany in their conquest, this means that is going to get funneled through Switzerland. Germany trades all of its gold with us, meaning the amount of gold that is within Switzerland is causing the economy to basically swim. Minus 60% consumer goods, plus 18% construction, plus 6% research speed, we are doing fantastic. But the problem that Switzerland is going to face during this time is that there really isn't anything else for them to do except try and maintain and build their own defenses. So that's what kind of has to happen. Patriotic shooting clubs, adopting a language, anything that can be done in order to try and boost the amount of forces that Switzerland can get into its military is great. Right now with Swiss militias, we're sitting at around 10% of the population, and historically what happened is that Switzerland had 20% of its population set for the military. So that's what we're going to do. Let's keep preparing those defenses. Defenses are to be prepared all across the country in anticipation of something happening. To the end of strengthening ourselves, Swiss women will be trained to also defend the country. The more population that we can get to be prepared to defend the land, the better that it is. But, unfortunately, France is still going to capitulate. Ironically enough, from Switzerland actually supporting the Allies more through trading gold and increasing the amount of trade that they can get, this in turn brings the French economy actually into a stronger state than it would have been in our timeline, thus allowing them to resist the Germans for longer, as they were actually able to fund more things. Of course, that means that the trade partners that we previously had are gone, where before we were buying from the French, and now instead all trade relations will have to be maintained with the Germans. It is at this point, by March of 1940, that things become very interesting. The Germans have obviously taken over everything. They've taken over France, they've taken over Denmark, they've taken over Norway, and really, Switzerland is surrounded in its own isolated sea of potential enemies. To that end, they have to maintain their neutrality through this. There's really nothing that they can do. The only thing that they could do, theoretically, in order to take an actual stance against the Axis during this time, is potentially funding resistance groups. Anything that Switzerland could do on the espionage side to help the Allies in order to try and weaken the Germans and potentially strengthen its own position will have to be done more clandestinely. Clandestine. They gotta be sneaky. This, ironically enough, is actually represented in the focus tree itself. There is an option for fund resistance groups. Therefore, that is what we are going to work towards doing. Because while we could go down the historical path of all adults training and really pump out as many units as we possibly can on this side here for Switzerland, there's not enough time for that. Thus, we will ban National Socialism within Switzerland while still maintaining relations with the Germans as they need us for trade, and utilize our spies to try and weaken Germany as much as possible. So the Swiss are going to start funding the Polish resistance right within Warsaw itself. As more and more states fall to the Axis, it's important that the border with both Italy and also Austria and everything else are strengthened, which precisely is what is going to be done. Even at the hands of pissing off the Axis, which is likely to still happen, relations will continuously be improved in order to maintain this kind of, relationship? Yeah, that would be the term. And this is pretty much going to be the status quo for the longest time. The only thing that Switzerland can do during this time period is continuously build up its own defenses, strengthen itself, and really just wait for anything to happen, while simultaneously building as much spy strength within the German Reich as it possibly can. After fortifying the border, that means Case North, and after Case North comes fortifying resistance groups. To that end, though, we are going to need to start federalizing the government. We have to increase the strength of control of the Federal Council. That's what needs to be in charge. Switzerland has focused for years on strengthening the strength of its strengthening the power of its cantons on the outer periphery. Now it needs to actually improve the strength of its federal government in order to respond. With Case North being done, the next step after that would be to start funding resistance groups, but we can't do that until we're actually below a certain amount. So, all right, hold on. Strength and military high command, yeah, we're going to have to do this. And in the meantime, begin to support Allied espionage. The fact that we maintain a neutral foreign policy does not prevent us from subversively supporting other democratic nations in their efforts to suppress fascism in Europe. In fact, our neutrality and proximity to the German Reich will make us vital in the international fight against fascism. Bitchy France, of course, at this point is starting to lose its rubber supplies. This becomes very important that we have been maintaining and building up synthetic refineries the entire time, and through developing that technology, it means that we will actually be able to support our own rubber industry. To that end, free trade is great, but at this point, it looks like the Swiss would have to explain to the Germans that they don't have nearly as many resources that can be exported. Instead, resources would be stockpiled inside of the state in order to be able to utilize for once war breaks out. But the Germans don't know this. The unfortunate reality is that strengthening any kind of resistance, or really doing anything here for that matter, is going to be exceptionally difficult. It is quite inherently risky, and so while we will try, there is a real chance that we will end up getting caught. But all we can do is try. The more funding that we can provide, the better it's going to be to try to destabilize things with the Germans. The reason being is that this would actually coincide great with the plans of what was happening getting ready to go into the middle of 1941. After all, the Germans were going to be launching Operation Barbarossa, thus, anything that the Swiss did at this time to actually affect the Axis would have been instrumentally more effective, because this meant more guns, more things behind the lines, thus weakening the Axis attack into the Soviet Union. Naturally, of course, this spy help would have been given to the United Kingdom, which already was doing anything that it possibly could to destabilize the German Reich from within, much in the same ways that the German Reich was trying to do the same thing to the UK. The more support that could be provided with further context, the better it would be for the UK in this scenario. But with both the Allied and also the German gold, it's at this point that Switzerland would be able to do something very sneaky. It could utilize German gold, things that it had stolen already from all these things all over the world, in order to be able to fund resistance groups in the places that the Germans had conquered. The more times that these resistance groups can be funded, the better that it's going to be for us, because it just means further and further incursions into the state that is going to be harder and harder for them to maintain. So much so that it seems that with this expanded work, with this difficulty that Germany has actually faced through expanding and funding resistance groups, Germany is not actually yet prepared to launch into the Soviet Union. They did not do that yet, which is quite surprising. Due to the fact that the Germans faced increased resistance from France, because France had more funds available to actually fund their military, they had less time, equipment, energy, and ability to be able to wage war on the Soviet Union. This, combined with increased resistance activity, means that over the course of World War II, the operation of Barbarossa ends up actually getting delayed by a couple months. The problem with this kind of delay is that means even less time is available for German forces to reach Moscow prior to Russian winter setting in, meaning things are going to become even more difficult for the Germans in this timeline. With the breaking of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, this means that Germany is now arguably one of the most precarious positions it can possibly be. All spy efforts would be made towards specifically destabilizing the regions that Germany occupies. The higher the resistance, the worse that it is for them. And on that note, just look at that resistance, 53% resistance strength within, say, Poland. That is incredibly high. Now begins a secret pact between the Switzerland and the Allies. They've offered support, they've done everything that they possibly can, but at this point, they cannot launch a strike against the Germans. They simply do not have the numbers, they don't have the means by which they can do so. The only thing they can do is try to be a massive thorn in the German side. Switzerland is not ready for an all-out war yet, or to even openly join a faction, but we can be certain that we won't be safe without friends. In order to defend our democracy in case of a surprise invasion, we can secretly meet with the United Kingdom and establish an agreement. We will promise to covertly support them, start preparing to join the war. In exchange, they will protect us if we are attacked. Even with increased difficulty, the Germans are still going to steamroll into the Soviets, of which they are not prepared. The problem with the Germans as they move further and further into enemy territory is that resistance is going to climb extremely high. The reason being is because at this point, the further they move in, the more equipment they spend, and they will not have the numbers. They won't have the equipment to be able to maintain their garrisons in all the varying territory, strengthening the resolve of the local resistance. The United Kingdom has accepted our secret pact. Through our back channels with the United Kingdom, we have confirmation they've agreed to our proposed secret alliance. From now on, they'll have our support against their enemy and protect us if we ever find ourselves at the edge of being invaded. This does not mean we are safe, though. The enemy could reveal our actions and see them as a threat, so we must continue with the same caution we've shown so far, while prepare for jumping into action. This would be the norm all the way through 1942, as Switzerland would, through this time, gradually lay the groundwork for further developments. Of course, it is very risky that during this time, some agents are going to end up being captured by the Germans. That is an unfortunate reality. As time goes on, this means that the Germans are less and less likely to be willing to work with the Swiss. This is another fascinating alternate history of what could have happened, is what could have happened if, say, for example, the Swiss efforts to undo the Germans were discovered, or the Germans have just declared war upon them. They very well could have. But that is why Switzerland would be preparing extensively for this. The fall of Rome in 1942. With the Axis weakened from resistance groups being funded all across the state, this means that theoretically, Italy could fall even faster, as already one of the things that was going on throughout Italy is that mafia groups all throughout southern Italy were being supported by the United States, so it is a very real possibility that the Swiss could have done the same thing. And as things get even more risky for the Axis as time goes on, Switzerland may eventually decide, hey, all that gold that you had, we could just go ahead and seize it. Suddenly cutting off any trade that the Axis could have. They could steal all financial resources of the state, thus weakening it even further. Even as the Italians managed to take back Rome, the United Kingdom was still able to invade from northern Italy, which that is fascinating in of itself. And it's at this point, getting ready to go into 1943, that there's a real possibility that Swiss volunteers may start appearing on the battlefield. Of course, they're not actually sent by the Swiss state. No. These are mere Swiss citizens. And you wouldn't even be able to tell because they speak Italian, or German, or anything else. Resistance members, if you will. After years of preparation, Switzerland would by this point have a remarkably strong air force, at least for something that has built up over the years. And with these volunteers is where things really start to make a difference. All of a sudden, every single bit of radar, every airbase, everything that is possibly based inside Switzerland that can be plausibly denied is being utilized. And now, all of a sudden, the air war takes a drastic turn. Every kind of air intelligence that you could possibly imagine is now being funneled straight into Allies' hand, which means that German air forces, which are already split heavily amongst their different fronts, are now going to be evaporating. With Swiss volunteer forces holding in the north, this means that the Germans, or rather that the UK, are able to move throughout the rest of the Italian peninsula, which in turn is only going to further weaken them. This is where things have turned out rather interesting. Even with the additional support, maybe it's because of the patch, maybe it's because of something else, the Soviet Union has not fared well against the Germans, even with them having a massive deficit, not able to actually sustain anything whatsoever in terms of, garrisons. Still, the Soviets are losing, hands down. But by mid-1943, potentially moving into 1944, the Swiss, who have been preparing for a long time at this point, would finally, potentially, be prepared to launch into action. So it is then that by mid-1943, with all of the funding of resistance groups, with the additional help, with the additional support, this means that the local Italians are able to actually rise up against their fascist overlords. The fascist variant of Italians. With jump into action, all Swiss troops have now actually become regular infantry divisions. No longer do we have a militia, now it is a full logistical force. And, actually, from jump into action, I lost all the options that I had to fund resistance groups. Well, with that being over, the Germans are just going to have to deal with it, I guess. Now, my friends, going into 1943, it is finally time, with the Italian Civil War raging, that the Swiss join an attack from the north. Switzerland actually does something. Of course, even with joining with the Allies, I don't think this is exactly an accurate representation where nothing has actually happened, because for whatever reason, the Allies seem to be in a significantly weaker position, and the Soviets are only just now starting to kind of turn things around, but they lost Moscow and everything else, which means, this is not how this was supposed to go, actually. My logic has worked against me. So, okay, I guess it's up to the Swiss to basically do everything themselves in this scenario, because for whatever reason, the Allies are... Oh my god, this is such chaos. What is going on? Why are you throwing yourselves at the Germans instead of being smart about this? What are you doing, Allies? Why did you launch... you launched a northern strike. Hey, the Americans have invaded! Except they didn't do France. They invaded the Netherlands. Maybe it is possible that with Swiss resistance, focusing on developing different territories in here, that if the United States had focused more on France, then maybe the Swiss funded the Dutch, I guess. With the liberation of Paris, this means that Allied forces are actually able to sweep in, except again, this time not from the north. Yes, actually, no, wait, hold on. The American invasion had literally no support whatsoever. Why would you do this? Why would you do this? And that, my friends, is the entire army of Germany within Paris caught, or France caught. Everything with there is done, and oh my god, the Allies are throwing their lives away. What are you doing over here, Allies? And Soviets, how have you not met... Somehow, even with the additional intelligence that was provided by the Swiss, they're still stupid. All the forces in the north get wiped out because for whatever reason the Allies have decided to throw away their entire lives and line trying to... I don't know what they're doing. I genuinely don't know what they're doing. I'm so confused about what the AI would be doing. I'm trying to construct a story here, and the game does not want to work with me. Finally, the fall of Berlin... Somehow, in this world, even with additional aid and security, maybe that is why. That is what we're going to say. Because of the additional intelligence that was provided by the Swiss, who did not like the communists, they did not give nearly as much support to the Soviets, this means that the Allies were able to actually move in and perform with greater help from the resistance. Yes, strengthened resistance aided German-occupied efforts in France and other places, which allowed the Allies to actually take back territory faster. Fall of Pearl Harbor! How? In what... United States! What are you doing? How is this even happening in this game? I'm trying to construct a story here, people. Yes, I can, Joya. I just finished filming here, so I'm gonna be... I'll stop here. Okay. Oh no. Thank you. I appreciate it. I did not get a chance to eat. Thank you. Bye. And with that, my friends, in 1944, somehow the end, still, it did not go faster. This should have ended significantly quicker than it did, considering everything that we were creating. Yes, Swiss military prowess would not have been necessarily very helpful in this scenario. They are better on the defense than they are on offense, but considering intelligence resources and also considering that they could have potentially stolen the entirety of Axis gold wealth, this meant that there wouldn't have been funding in order to be able to produce the troops necessary to actually defend Germany's borders, thus allowing the Allies to be able to take back territory faster. I can only imagine that in this alternate history scenario that we are building, if we want to be truly generous to Switzerland, then the Allies would go and allow Switzerland to have a nominal degree of occupation. Something in which a large swath of Austria, though we did not get all of it, would be granted to Switzerland to be able to govern and oversee. With the Soviets not being able to perform nearly as well in the war, which theoretically they should have been able to do more, but in this world that we've constructed, the Swiss efforts to support the Allies meant that the Allies performed remarkably better in the war, thus allowing them to be able to take more territory than the Soviets had, and being able to establish a greater sphere of influence, so the Comintern did not actually get nearly as much going into the Cold War. But with that, my friends, I think that we're going to go ahead and end things here today. This alternate history scenario, though I was able to explain it properly, did not go as well as I wanted to on the game-wise. That was interesting. Might have to utilize cheats more in the future in order to make what it is that I'm saying happen. Either way, thank you all for watching. Please let me know in the comment section below what kind of alternate scenarios we should be doing next, and I look forward to seeing you all in the future. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, and goodbye, my friends. See you next time.